All right, so the first thing that we want to talk about is setting up a good workspace. So one thing to think about is how the space behind your child looks on camera. We want to make sure that it's not too distracting. That can be distracting not only for your kid, but also for other students in the class. So think about things like where to set up a desk or a table, and maybe instead of having their back into the open space of the room, maybe their back could be to the wall, and then it just shows a blank wall behind them. Um, and there's a lot of benefits like to this virtual environment. We can wear comfy clothes, we can be in comfy chairs, but there's also limits to that. So you want to avoid, if possible, having your kid work from their bed or even from a couch can sometimes create unnecessary, distractions or even the temptation to doze off or get distracted. Other things that have to do with the workspace would be like what's around your child. So they should have all their schoolwork, but do they have access to a television or video games or a phone? Those types of things we want to make sure that we keep out of that workspace and treat it really kind of like a special area. And finally, one thing that I've heard from talking with students is it can be really personal to show your home, right? So to be able to turn your camera on and feel comfortable with that, that's a very personal thing, to give a window like into our personal lives. So having a workspace that students can kind of own and feel comfortable with, and maybe even be able to share things about themselves, is really important. And maybe Janice, if you want to add a little bit about your workspace right now.
Um, yeah, so I decorated my workspace as well as having some of the instruments that I need. As I'm a band teacher, I need to have things at kind of close range. But part of who I am is I used to be in the UW marching band, so that's a part of my personality that I want to share with my students. So I have that. I have things on the bulletin board that I feel represent me and my teaching, and I just want to be able to share those things. So students having something behind them that represents themselves is also a great thing if that's something they want to share.
Next slide. Another part of creating routines is setting up a good daily schedule. And I think it's really important to let our kids own a lot of these pieces and really feel empowered to like choose some of these items and what works best for them. So we need to plan everything from waking up, planning in breaks, how lunch is going to work, and also building in movement, because sitting at a desk staring at a screen all day gets very long, for students and for adults. So we need to be able to plan in some movement. Um, as I mentioned, with letting your student kind of own this, I think it's important to develop some of those skills. Can they figure out some time management in terms of how early they have to wake up to be ready for the day? Can they manage during their asynchronous time when it's just independent work time? Maybe they can give themselves a 5-minute break to walk around the house and maybe get a snack or whatever they need. And again, let's work on finding some of the benefits. So there are benefits to this virtual learning. There's a lot more flexibility. You can go pet your dog if you need a quick emotional break from whatever you're working on. And don't be afraid to let your child embrace some of those things, because those aren't going to be around forever. Eventually, fingers crossed, we'll be back in school. So some of those little things that do bring joy to your day, don't let those go unnoticed and unappreciated. And I would just add one more thing would be in terms of breaks, maybe plan some small things like during those chunks of work time, maybe the first 5 minutes or the last 5 minutes can be a time for that movement or just a time to kind of step away from the screen. I saw something cool. It's 20-20-20 rule. So just to like reset your eyes, you can look at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds. And that should kind of give yourself a little bit of a mental reset.
And then, as well as all great suggestions, actually, Christina, if we could go back to the previous slide, that would be great. Um, as far as checking assignments and grades, you and your child should know how to log into your district's learning management system and know how to check on assignment completion and grades. In our district, we actually have two places where students and parents can look. We've always had Infinite Campus, which is where grades get reported. But this year, because we are virtual, we are using a thing called Canvas. But there's other learning management systems as well, maybe Google Classroom or Moodle or Blackboard Learn. There's a lot of different things out there that your district might use. So in Canvas, what we do as teachers is that's the place that we post all the things that are important for each day. So I will post the slides that we will go through during class that have all the information that students need. I will post videos. So as a band teacher, I'll post videos of here's how you play this music that we're working on. And often I will post one for each instrument. So your child should know how to log in there and how to get into the learning management system. And also, say they've missed class. Sometimes the internet crashes. Sometimes the Chromebook shuts down or whatever device your child is using. There's a lot of reasons that somebody might miss class. I've had many times students type in the chat, hey, Google Meet is being glitchy. Can you repeat those instructions again? And so, those are the things that we try to do. But if your child gets glitched out and doesn't hear something, the place they should check is the learning management system, because that's where all the information is. So that's the key thing for them to be able to do, as well as once you go in, the assignments are all in there. Parents, I believe, can get in and see the daily slides as well, all the things that we post as teachers. And then another piece of that too is when assignment is completed by a student, then we grade it. And often I will put in a comment. Usually it's great job. I really appreciated how you used the dynamics in this piece of music or something like that. But occasionally I will say something like, hey, you forgot to do E natural. Can you go back and do this again? So your child not only should check to see if they've completed their assignments, but also if there's comments that maybe they need to redo a portion of the assignment. So that's also something that they could check as well. At Monona Grove, we have asynchronous days. We teach on Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday is a day for students to catch up, to do the things that they need to do. They have assignments for that day, that it's still a school day, and then also things that they can do. I work a lot with sixth graders, and I'm on a team where I meet with the sixth grade teachers. They've created this great document called the Catch Up Must Do May Do Sheet. So every Wednesday, they put this out to all the sixth graders, and it has all the assignments. So if you have catch-up work, these are the things that someone might need to catch up with. Here's the work that everybody should be completing. So there's a language arts section, a math section, a science section, a social studies section. And often they put links in. So science, for example, might say study for 15 to 20 minutes using the Quizlet. It's a link, and any other resources. And then, hey, there's a quiz on Thursday and Friday, so you should probably do this. And then wave experiment choice. And then it says assignment in Canvas. So that would tell your child, well, you need to go to Canvas to do this piece of it. There's also links for all the classes they might be taking, including band and art and PE, any class that your child might take. So in sixth grade, our district is our teachers are doing this. And in seventh grade, by the time they're moving to eighth grade, the teachers are asking them to start creating their own planning for assignment completion.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off that at the high school, again, trying to have your student own some of these responsibilities. A lot of times, in person, teachers can help manage these things, but now that students are at home and there's less of that interaction daily, it's kind of a big opportunity for them to be able to come up with those skills for prioritizing and creating to-do lists and managing that on their own. But they're not necessarily ready for that at 14 and 15, or even 11, 12, 13 in middle school. So that's something that you can definitely help with by looking at their learning management system and really creating that list for them. One thing I can just add to is when you're having conversations with your child, the way that you kind of approach things really has a big impact. So if you're noticing that they're missing assignments, if you go, hey, why didn't you do this? That's going to close the conversation off. So consider rephrasing it and say, hey, can I help you finish this up? Or, hey, I noticed this wasn't done. What questions do you still have? Or do we need to reach out to your teacher? And try to really make it more of like a what can we do instead of what didn't you do? And I think you'll be able to see some more returns on that. Next slide. Another big portion of virtual school that's very different from in-person school is how to get participation, how to feel like you're really engaged in the learning process. So we thought we'd come up with some ideas for this. Cameras, obviously, and the muting of the microphones is something to consider. There's times and places when cameras should be on or maybe off. There's times and places when we should be muted or if we should be unmuted. So it's really important to kind of talk through some of those scenarios with your child, particularly when a student's working with a teacher or working in small groups. I think it's important to have cameras on if possible. And also conversation in verbal conversation instead of just in the chat can go a long ways. So instead of going back and forth in the chat and not really quite being clear with what you're explaining or with what your question is, all of a sudden a quick 30-second conversation can go a long way. So I would definitely recommend setting some small goals with your kid for when they can have their cameras on, when they can feel comfortable speaking. And the more that they do it, they'll become more and more comfortable being able to participate. And also, teachers use those functions like chat to be able to get engagement and get some instant feedback. So I might ask a multiple choice question and say, put the letter that you think it should be, and I'll see a bunch of B's and C's in the answers. So then I'll say, okay, well, I see we're kind of down to these two. Let's talk about it. And I might ask for a volunteer then to talk about why they chose B, and then another person why they chose C. So it really does get that more of that in-school feeling to the virtual learning.
Yeah, and I'll just say, as far as cameras on, cameras off, I know different districts have different expectations. Our district is more flexible with it, but some districts say your camera will be on. And so it just depends on what your district is asking. I will say, from a band teacher perspective, when I have 80 students on a Zoom, like on a Google Meet, I don't need their cameras on when we're all together, but we have a lot of time where we break into small groups. And when we're in the small group, it is vital for me to be able to see the students, because as I'm explaining, hey, your fingers go here. It's a huge difference if the kid's fingers are here or here. It's the difference between I can play D and D is not coming out right. So if I can see what they're doing with their fingers and with their lips, then I can be an effective teacher. And so being able to encourage your child to, at least in the small groups, be able to sometimes have your camera on. And I will also ask students to unmute one at a time. Hey, everybody's going to play B flat. Okay, we're just going to go right down. Everybody's going to play just that one note. And then I can hear if you're doing it right or if it's not coming out right. Because even if I see your fingers doing it right, maybe the sound isn't right. So there's definitely times that we do need to have audio at least a little bit. And there's times that we need to have see them because this is all feedback that we would normally have in person. And so what teachers want to see will definitely differ, from class to class. I would imagine that PE teachers might want to see some skills like C skills, and not just have kids write in the chat. So, different teachers will have different expectations for what they would like to see with cameras and audio and chat. And then actually the last thing I will say is, I notice for me personally, if I'm in a video meeting like this, I pay a lot more attention when my camera's on. So students, I'm sure, are no different. So there is, if you're trying to help your child be more focused, just knowing that other people can see them does, help them focus, because, obviously you can see whether someone's paying attention or if they're on their phone. Okay. Next slide. So communicating with teachers used to be super easy, right? The kid would come into my room and say, hey, I'm having trouble with this, or they raise their hand, I have a question. Well, now I see them less often, and sometimes they have questions based on an assignment, but then I'm not going to see them for 3 days. And so one of the things that we worked with the 6th graders on is how to, well, first of all, check email. They should be checking email every day. Students should definitely be checking their email at least once a day. And then how to email a teacher. So we broke it down for the 6th graders. Okay, what do you put in the subject? I am having trouble with this. Don't put a whole sentence in it. in the subject, right? Like that's not where you write. And I've received some emails like this where the whole problem is in the subject, but like a short summary of the problem goes in the subject. And then you start with, "Dear Ms. Stone." And then the next sentence is, "Something pleasant. I hope you're having a good day." And then the next sentence is, "I'm having trouble with, can you help me?" And then closing, "Thank you," and the student's name. So like we had the sixth graders actually practice writing an email, but this is not necessarily a skill that kids needed before this, but this is a great life skill, right? Everyone has to write email at some point. So, at the older grades, I think at the middle school level, we all needed to practice this. I don't know about the high school, but Tom?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a skill that some students still don't quite have, and they're still working on developing, and that's okay. And I think this is a good opportunity, again, as parents, to sort of pass some of that responsibility over to your child and really let them be advocates for themselves and help them be that advocate for themselves. Instead of, you going to your email and reaching out to the teacher about XYZ, ask your student, hey, would you feel comfortable emailing your teacher? Can I sit down and help you craft that email? And all of a sudden, they're going to feel more comfortable the next time that they have a question to do that on their own. And it might not happen right away. And there also are times when it's still important for you as a parent to communicate and not just have your student do it. If there's larger issues, if you notice that your child is really behind or just really not in a good place with whatever subject, that might be a good time to reach out to the teacher and have them help you prioritize what should we focus on. What are the big picture items that we really need to tackle. So kind of you have to weigh those things as a parent and decide, is this sort of a small thing that my student can manage themselves, or is it a time for me to step in and take over? Next slide. All right, this is more of an open-ended kind of question or prompt here. So how do we create authentic classroom interactions when we're not actually in the classroom? And what can we all do? What can teachers do? What can students do? What can parents do to really make this still feel like school? So if I had the answer to this, I think I'd be rich by now. But I think it's more about just finding small things that make you feel connected. Possibly, maybe you want to reach out to some of your kids' friends and set up like a virtual lunch date, or maybe there's ways. Ask your kid, what did they like about school and what did they miss about school, and then see if you can just create that. And it's not going to be easy, but I'd be definitely challenge you to ask your kid, what do they think could be better, right? What could they see that would benefit them more and make them feel more connected? And their ideas, I think, are definitely valid and should be shared with their teachers, because this experience is new for all of us, and we're all learning as teachers as well. And we want it to be the smoothest and the most enjoyable and engaging for our students as possible. So we're open to hearing those things.
Yeah, and I will also add, I think routines, like having a routine. So in our district, we have been virtual since the beginning of the school year. So having a routine really, really helps. And I know during the first weeks when I was teaching the sixth graders like basic rhythms, like we were just starting, but I had the rhythms up on the screen and we were all counting and clapping them together. And a student emailed me and said, "Gosh, thank you. This makes it feel like real school again." Like, because we were all participating together, we were all doing something together. And it reminded her of her strings class the year before. So, as we move into virtual learning or just stay in virtual learning, the things that we can do that makes it feel like what we used to do in regular school, in-person school, I guess I should say, is all of those things that we can do makes it feel better. And the next slide. So I guess there are some upsides to all of this. As much as I really, really would love to be in person with all of my students, it's so much easier to teach band in the same room with them. Um, they are learning some new and useful skills. The things that we just talked about, students are now learning to write emails. Students are now learning to prioritize in ways that they didn't have to do before. And so these are new experiences, I mean, think about what we're doing right now. Students are getting used to being on this kind of technology, which maybe is something that they will do in a future job. I mean, there's a lot of things that they're learning right now that are going to help them in the future. So I know there's a lot of worry about our kids behind, but they're also learning things that are new and different that are going to help them. So there is a positive side as well.
Definitely. I talk about with my students a lot who are maybe not in the best place with virtual learning and they're frustrated and they don't feel engaged. And I'm like, well, let's talk about that. Why is that? And they're like, well, I just miss being around people. And I said, okay, so guess what? You just learned that about yourself. You just learned that when you go on in life and you're choosing a career path, you know that you want to be working with other people and you want to have that collaboration because that's important. And on the flip side, I have students who are totally thriving this year. They love the independent nature. They love that they can pace themselves however they need to with classes. They love that there aren't distractions from other students and they're really thriving. And so I talk with them and I say, you know what, you guys are learning about yourselves too, and you might want more of a self-paced job, or maybe you want to be your own boss. And that tells you, you know, those are strengths that you're learning about yourself and things that can help inform where you go. So, you know, yes, maybe we're missing out on some of our, you know, typical curriculum here and there, but we're also learning a lot and students should really celebrate some of those new skills that they've been developing this year. So we'll just kind of end by saying we can all do this. We can take on these new challenges. We can find success. We are finding success. And we have to keep looking at some of those little things and celebrating all those little wins along the way because those keep us going.